Hello there.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So Anne, you sit on some of the most important boards of our time. Netflix, Mayo Clinic. Talk to us about what constitutes a great board? What are sort of the dynamics, the things to think about, the skills and roles in your experience?
Well, I think one thing to know is that I went on Netflix and Mayo within a year. And one of the things that I looked at as I was talking to Reed Hastings, as I was talking to Dr. John Noseworthy from Mayo, was who's on this board? What does this board look like? And the Netflix board had two great women, Ann Mather and Leslie Kilgore. And I thought, that ticks off some boxes for me. Two smart women, already on board, great tenure with the company. And the same held true for Mayo. I mean, they were diverse boards, they were interesting people. And I remember Judy Estrin, I called Judy Estrin and I said, do you have any advice about going on these boards? And she said, two pieces of advice for you. Number one, get to know the other board members before you say yes, because the days you're in the bunker with them, you're gonna wanna make sure you're with good, smart people. And all those annoying things that board members did to you? And I said, yes. And she said, don't do that. So a good board is a board that I believe reflects the customers that you're serving. And the boards that I'm serving on certainly are constructed that way.
And so what about in the situation that many companies, particularly in tech, find themselves in, where they have a fairly homogenous board, similar backgrounds, men, et cetera? How do you get that first new type of board member in place, the woman, the customer, the diverse thinker, if you don't have what you just described in place?
Well, I just think you have to. I mean, if you're in the business of selling something, you're selling a service, you're selling an organization, you've got a product in the marketplace, you have got to reflect, you need that brain power sitting next to you. You need the person who's going to say, no, that's not the way I buy it. Or you need that expertise. You need people from different walks of life who are in there, they're not in your mindset. They haven't been in your business. It was one of the great worries I had about joining the Mayo board. I was sitting there thinking, I've never done heart surgery, why do they need me? And they didn't need me for that. They needed me because I had a background in media, I knew how communications ran, and I understood storytelling, and their hope was that I would understand the story that they were trying to tell in a very complicated world of healthcare.
Yeah, and so, so we're fortunate to have many of the top venture capitalists in the world sitting here today. We are in an industry where 93% of general partners at venture capital firms are male. It's, how would you, I guess, make the case for, oftentimes we're investing, it's a 3-person board or a 5-person board. How would you make the case to kind of make that a priority immediately upon investing? Do you think that's realistic?
To invest in something
Well, if you have a
small?
3-person board or a 5-person board and the company is just getting going and maybe you haven't found product market fit, and so the argument might be, should building a diverse board be a real priority? What is the real impact that can have on the business in a business that doesn't yet know if it'll quite exist?
Well, I wouldn't think of it as, gee, I need a woman, or gee, I need a person of color to diversify my board. I'd be looking at it as a development opportunity for the company. I'd be looking at, I don't have all the answers, and neither do my two partners or one of my partners. I need to bring in diversity of thought. And then, really start to canvas and find out that there are many people who don't look like you who can bring that skill set to the table.
Yeah. So maybe I'd love to hear if you have any anecdotes you could share of a time when you sat on a board and that board really drove an important and difficult decision, a change, something that had dramatic impact that came from that board's composition.
Nothing yet that's been super dramatic. Certainly, pricing conversations at Netflix, the things that a board would discuss as a part of the future of the company. Certainly watching Mayo operate in a climate that is just fraught with difficulty at every turn with healthcare and insurance companies. And the one thing that I think is really important to know about Mayo is, for all of the business that the Mayo Clinic is in, for, all of the money that they put into research and the things that they're discovering, the one thing that has remained constant, which I think is a great credit to the CEO, to the team there, and to the board, is that it is a patient-centric company. And I think that's an important thing for any board to know, which is, who are we? At our core, who are we? What do we represent? What are we here to do?
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, and as the Netflix culture doc is one of those documents that I think almost everyone in this room has probably read at some time and resonated deeply. How do you see it, or do you see it manifested all the way up to the board level? How does the board really connect to that culture? How do you make something like that real from your perspective?
I have to tell you, that culture deck is one of the best documents ever written. And I think it should be, every single company should, put it on the reading list for their employees. And the one thing that I take with me always is no brilliant jerks. Because it's baked right into their culture. You can be the smartest one in the room, but if you're not operating to delight our consumers, if that isn't why you're coming to work every day, we don't need you. And it really does. It's something that I've observed, in my time there. One of the great things about Reed Hastings as a leader and the way our board operates, yes, we're expected to be at the board meetings. We use Google Docs, very rich experience, instead of the standard board book. We are expected to be at a quarterly business review every year. We're expected to be at his meeting with his direct reports once a year. We're expected to be, with his top 200 people once a year. There's a lot of learning that we're able to do from the people who are making all of this happen. And I think it increases our understanding while we continue to retain our independence.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Have you seen him kick out brilliant jerks?
Yes, I have.
As you think about the role of the board with a CEO, a big topic these days. What is the right role? Is it coach? Is it guardrails? Is it compensating for weaknesses? And particularly as we have more and more first-time CEOs who are building their own leadership skills real time, what is the right and appropriate relationship between a board member and a CEO?
Well, let's talk about first, what is the job of the board member? I mean, the board member represents the shareholders. And that has to be in your mind. Now, how you operate in the room, if you have, again, I'm lucky with the boards I'm on, if you have those brilliant CEOs, I think you play a wide variety of roles, depending on what the issue is that's facing the business. You could be at times a guardrail, you could be a coach, you should never be someone, though, that goes along to get along. You are there to represent the shareholders and to make sure they're getting full value. And at the same time, really understanding what this company is and where it's going.
You have a very good explanation as to, I don't know, when you've seen a CEO founder dynamic kind of move at odds and how a board has handled those two. Are you coming in at such a late stage that you typically have the permanent leader in place?
Well, obviously I came in at a late stage here, but I'm also on the Tastemade board, which is not a startup, but it's a young board. And it's a very different dynamic because it's a dynamic that's more engaged in what's going on with the business.
And then, as you look at corporate governance more broadly and some of what we've lived through in the last year, how do you think our industry should navigate a role in which we're minority investors when we're seeing things like sexual harassment or gender issues or the scandals we're seeing, and calling them out may be at odds with our investment, or we frankly may not have the power to technically make the change? How can we have the greatest impact on kind of those situations?
Well, you're right. You may not have the power to make the change, but you do have the power to make an impact. And I think calling out questions, have the ability to pick up the phone and call the CEO and say, we really want to add this to the board agenda. We really want to be alerted when these things happen in the company. We really want to know, how people are feeling right now, because certainly, the past year has been nothing but a really great book of instruction about being transparent, about being absolutely open about what's going on. And I think it's going to make people, in the end, better CEOs, because the expectations have been raised, the bar has been raised. We're expecting better work cultures. We're expecting culture to be a strategy for growth of companies.
And is there a way to sort of, I guess, bring teeth or accountability to these values? For example, if you have a value of trying to build diversity into your company, and we hear a lot about pipeline issues and other sorts of things, is there a way as a board that you can drive more accountability to put teeth in place as you're looking forward?
You can drive it through compensation. It could be a goal that your CEO has that flows through the entire organization that is tied to comp. It could be that part of your bonus is tied to this. If you really want to make it stick, you have the money.
And what would you say, let's say you're starting in a situation, again, in our industry, 3% of CEOs are female, venture-backed CEOs. Gender parity feels a long way away, right? 50-50. How quickly can we expect change? So as we're setting those goals, if you're in an organization that's 95% male, any sort of guidance as to how quickly we push, kind of push the teeth and the accountability there?
Well, I think the time to push is now. And I think you have the wind at your back because, certainly everything we've been reading for the last 12 months points toward diversity as a huge plus for every single one of these boards. Now, it can't be diversity without true equality and without dignity in the workplace. But I do think you have that opportunity. Another great tool is succession planning. Because once you start to look at these organizations as growing, once they're out of their early stages, you really need to set them up for the future and really starting to identify who's coming in. And my friend Bob Keegan has written a couple of books about this, whether it was Immunity to Change or an Everyone Culture, really picking out the people who are in it not just to climb to the next step, but who are your big learners here?
Yeah.
Who are the people who are reaching to learn more as opposed to reaching for the next step? So, in the context of succession planning, I would be looking for those kind of people.
And I've heard you speak before on sort of the role of coaching, the role of 360s, and even a concept around a comp committee type thing in HR. Maybe some best practices in that area and some things are you thinking about things like comp committee, like an HR audit annually or anything of that nature?
I think it's a healthy thing to do. I really do. I think it's important to really understand who your workforce is, no matter how big your team is. I think it's really important that you're measuring diversity in the right way. You're not just looking at it and saying, well, good news, our company is 50-50, male, female. It's not enough anymore. That is not an expression of diversity. That's an expression of gender. But once you start peeling away the layers and you're looking at, well, what about our EVPs? What about our VPs? Where are different groups stuck right now? And then getting in there and finding out why they're stuck. Why are they unable to move? Is it the person who's leading the division? Is it the CEO of the company? Is it in some way something that the board has put into place? Why aren't you seeing growth?
Yeah, and one thing you might take for granted, again, given the stage of boards you're on, is the power of the 360 review, and which tends to exist in big companies but doesn't always exist in growing companies. Are there any situations where do you see 360 reviews shared all the way through the board? And sort of any sort of transparency around strengths and the positives around exposing the strengths and weaknesses of the CEO and the organization?
Well, let's just talk about 360s for 2 seconds, because I did use them throughout my career with my teams. And I got to a point, my early days of Disney, where there was an employee, it was recommended that the employee have a 360. And I sat down and I thought, this is all anonymous. You're supposed to pick so many people. This is at least the way we did it then. So many people, who interact with this person who is their boss, so many of their peers, and so many people that they would relate to in other divisions. And I chose to do it. I chose not to be anonymous. I just thought, you know what, you've just got to hear it from me. And I did a 360, I called it 360 Live, because I felt that there was such an absence of candor in getting a piece of paper from all these unknown people, and this is who said it about me when, and it doesn't tell you how to get better, it doesn't tell you how to improve or how to grow, it just tells you where you're stuck at the moment. When it comes to a CEO, I have the same feeling. I think the 360 should be a 365 exercise. You should always have the ability to have the conversation with the CEO, ask the question, why this strategy, why this behavior, or not calling them out, but just having a relationship where there is that much candor and respect that you can discuss when things are going a little bit sideways and hopefully get things back on track.
Yeah, well, that's great. And so before we move off of this topic, we obviously, tech and venture capital and more or less every industry has been confronted with some of the most egregious predatory behavior out there recently. However, out of that and alongside that, we have tremendous good, and all change will happen not through just the women, but through our male allies. Right. Many of whom are my partners and are here in this room. And so we have to let people make mistakes and all of these sorts of things. So if you were to give one piece of advice to all of our male allies here and in the audience, what's one thing they could do today, tomorrow, this week, to move the needle forward on this particular topic?
You're right. There are so many good men, and I've had great male allies in my career. My greatest ally of all time was George Bodenheimer. George ran ESPN when I was running Disney ABC Television Group, and we used to call ourselves Ham and Eggs. And it was truly as simple as, I've got your back. And because we would go into deals together, we were in the same industry, we had very different product groups that we were representing, but it was a level of trust and respect, and we really treasured that about each other. And we talked about it. We talked about it openly with our teams because we wanted them to emulate that behavior. We wanted them to understand that, this is our bar. This is how we run Disney Media Networks. This is why we are successful, is because we have this partnership, we have each other's back. And I think for you have male allies in this room, men have female allies. And I think there's nothing wrong with talking about it and putting it out there as, yes, I've read, everything that happened in, Hollywood or Silicon Valley this week, but this is my relationship with Kara, or this is my relationship, with another woman on my board. This is what we do. And I think it's really in getting at those stories. Let's hear those stories. Let's hear what people are doing to really move forward, because there, as you said, there are good examples, and there are a lot of good examples in the room.
Is there anything we as women can do to engage the men, to make them feel safe, to make them feel like they can make mistakes, and to ask maybe for their help in certain moments?
I think tell them it's okay. It's actually okay to talk about our partnership, how we do things together. But, we've seen a lot of retribution, and I think it's really important that we're clear. I don't think we ask them to stand up. I think we ask them to tell their stories the way we're telling our stories.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, we're going to shift gears for the last little bit here. So one of the things people may not know about Anne is that she actually, she has a master's in education from Harvard, mm-hmm. and her path into media was actually through her passion for education. Mm-hmm. And so as you think about the future of work and the future of organizations, I'm curious how you think play might factor into that path.
Yeah, and we've talked about this. Yeah. I think a lot about the future of play, because I think it's linked to the future of work. I think it's linked to the future of organizations. And I've read too many articles where too many people are concerned that their kids are just glued to, the phone or to their iPad. And recently I read a story that a dad wrote about his son playing with Legos, and his son created this little movie theater out of Legos and put little people in the seats, and then he took his father's iPhone and used it as a screen. And I thought, that really, it doesn't speak to play as much as it speaks to imagination. And I think that's what we have to keep front and center as we move, as kids, our digital natives, grow up with more and more and more technology. We have to make sure that it tickles them, that it sparks something in them, and that we run with it. Yeah. And this is the world they're going to continue to live in. You know, you look at a company like Pixar, and you know, Pixar has genius technology. They've produced amazing things, but they've also written some of the most beautiful stories, you know, any of us have ever seen. So they actually go hand in hand. An organization, the future of work, I think, you know, certainly a big part is what we've been talking about, which is the future of how people work together. But I mentioned Bob Keegan and his partner, Lisa Leahy, who have really studied, you know, how people evolve. You know, how do people grow up in adulthood? You know, we have a lot of information about how they grow up from, you know, kindergarten until they graduate from college. We think we know a lot about millennials. But when you really look at people who are in the workforce, I think you really have to look at them as learners. And it's not that you're their teacher if you're their boss, but you really want to make sure that the problems that they're being given to solve or work on or brainstorm are things that are allowing them to get bigger. Not just, as I said, to the next step, but really expanding their knowledge and causing them to imagine what's next.
It really is, it ties into our whole last conversation, because it's not just empirically doing good work, but it's feeling good about the work you do.
Exactly.
Right, and it's the confidence to be different and think different and
yeah, it's kind of getting to that point in life where you spend zero time thinking about what people are thinking of you, and you spend more time developing, you know, what's inside and figuring out what's next, regardless of what people are going to think.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to do a little speed round here at the end. Best book for a new senior hire?
I would have to say An Everyone Culture, Bob Keegan.
Wonderful. The most important personal habit?
Sleep. I love it.
You and Ariana are on the same page. One thing you wish you did differently in your career or your personal life?
I honestly sleep more. I was sleep deprived for so many decades.
Most exciting consumer trend, and it can't be crypto.
Okay, I would have to say, I would like it to be the return of my privacy. I would like that return of security. So it's something in cybersecurity that's gone to the consumer level. I know people are worried about my data being protected. Now I would like to feel better protected.
One thing in ed tech you'd like to see everyone in this room invest in?
My passion project, Boars and Bean. I've been developing for the last 2 years a project that actually started as a TV project, but I think is a not multimedia, but multi-device project that actually focuses on, you know, a world that is a lot more reflective of the kids who are in it. It's for preschoolers, it's inclusive, it really does wrestle down life for families who live with kids on the spectrum.
That's wonderful. And when you go pitch VCs, just make sure you call it future of work and not ed tech, and it will be funded in a second.
Does not resonate.
Last question for today. What gives you optimism that change is coming? It's coming soon.
What gives me, I actually wake up every morning optimistic. I do believe, and I think given the, you know, kind of the natural horrors we've all lived through this year, whether it was Houston or Puerto Rico, or we actually live part-time in Montecito, so we've seen up close what can happen. I think what keeps me optimistic really is the people's will to keep going and to keep helping not just their neighbors, but people that they've never met, they will never meet. But just that human compassion isn't dead. Times are tough, but human compassion has conquered.
Thank you, Anne. Please join me in thanking Anne.
Thank you.